He didn't expect to hear crying that morning. Not out there, not this far from town. The land had been quiet for months, just wind brushing through dry grass, the distant creak of his barn gate, and the low hum of a man who'd learned to live alone. But that sound, soft, broken, desperate, it didn't belong here. Elias Maddox froze halfway through stacking hay, his heartbeat slowing into silence. At first, he thought it was the wind playing tricks again. Then he heard it, a woman's sob, faint but real, carried through the cold air like a lost prayer. He set the pitchfork down and started walking. The frost cracked under his boots. Past the corral, past the fence where the wood leaned old and gray. And then he saw her. A woman sat on the ground beside his fence line, wrapped in a torn blanket, her head bowed low. Her hair was tangled, face streaked with tears. And in her trembling arms, she held something small. Elias stopped breathing. It was a baby, wrapped in an old piece of cloth he recognized instantly. His blanket, the same one that had gone missing from his porch weeks ago. He stood there, torn between disbelief and something deep he couldn't name. The woman looked up, eyes wild with fear, like a cornered deer. For a second, neither spoke. Only the wind dared move between them. Elias's voice came out rough, gentle. "You lost?" She didn't answer. Her arms only tightened around the child. He saw the baby's tiny hand twitch, reaching up for her chin, too weak even to cry. The sight hit him harder than a bullet. Whoever she was, wherever she came from, she'd been through hell. "Come inside," he said quietly. "The wind'll cut you to pieces out here." She didn't move, just stared at him, as if measuring whether kindness was real anymore. For a long time, she didn't move. Elias stood there, cold, biting through his coat, waiting for an answer that wouldn't come. Then the baby gave a soft whimper, a fragile sound that broke through the frozen air like light cracking open the dark. That tiny voice seemed to remind her what mattered most. Slowly, trembling, she rose to her feet. Elias took a careful step back, giving her space. He could see the fear in her eyes, not the kind that comes from danger outside, but the kind born from pain that never really left. When she finally nodded, it was small, hesitant, but enough. He led the way across the yard, boots crunching through frost, and opened the door to his cabin. The warmth inside hit her like a wave. The scent of coffee, smoke, and pine filled the room. She hesitated in the doorway, clutching the child close, as if someone might still snatch him away. Elias turned back and said quietly, "You're safe here. Sit down." She didn't speak a word, only walked in, slow and cautious, like a shadow unsure of its place in the light. Elias stoked the fire, poured water into a pot, and tried not to stare too long. When she finally looked up, he noticed her eyes, dark green, tired, and full of something that looked like sorrow wrapped in secrets. The baby stirred, and Elias knelt beside them. "He's cold," he murmured. "You need to get him warm." Her lips trembled. I didn't mean to trespass." Elias shook his head. "You didn't. That blanket." He stopped. "Where'd you get it?" She looked down, almost ashamed. "I found it on the porch. I was sorry, but the baby, he needed something warm." He felt a strange pull in his chest. That same blanket had belonged to his wife, the one who died 2 winters ago. He'd left it on the porch one morning, unable to bring himself to throw it away. Maybe fate had carried it where it was needed most. Elias took a breath. "You can keep it." Her eyes flickered, a mix of surprise and gratitude. She rocked the baby gently. "His name's Noah," she whispered. "He hasn't eaten since last night." Elias poured milk into a small tin cup and warmed it over the fire. As she fed the baby, her hands shook so badly that Elias had to steady the cup for her. He didn't ask questions, not yet. He could tell she wasn't ready to answer them. After a while, when Noah finally drifted to sleep, Elias asked softly, "Where's the father?" Her eyes filled again. "Gone," she said. "Or maybe he's still out there. I don't know anymore." Elias leaned back in his chair. He'd known that kind of pain, waiting for someone who'd never come back. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was heavy, the kind that spoke louder than words ever could. Outside, snow began to fall. Inside, the cabin held two strangers and a child who'd just changed both their lives. The days that followed blurred into one another. The woman, her name was Clara, stayed mostly silent, tending to the baby, keeping to one corner of the cabin as if she were afraid her presence might break something sacred. Elias didn't push her. He'd learned that sometimes silence was the only language the broken had left. Each morning he'd chop wood outside while Clara sat near the fire, humming softly to the child. It was the only time he ever heard her voice, soft, cracked, beautiful in its sadness. The kind of sound that made you wonder what she'd lost. One night, a storm rolled in fierce and sudden. Wind slammed against the shutters, rain hitting the roof like pebbles. The baby cried from the noise, and Clara tried her best to calm him, but she was shaking herself. Elias saw it. Not just fear of the storm, but something deeper. The kind of fear that comes when you've run too long, from too much. He went to her side. "You're safe here," he said again. "Whoever you're running from, they won't find you here." Her eyes snapped up, startled. "How do you know I'm running?" Elias gave a tired smile. "You don't hold a baby that tight unless you're trying to keep him from the world." She stared at him for a long time before finally whispering, "There were men. They wanted the baby. Said he wasn't mine to keep." Elias felt the old ache rise in him, that instinct to protect, to fight for something fragile. He placed a hand on the table, steady and certain. "They'll have to go through me first." Something in her eyes changed then, a small flicker of trust, fragile but real. For the first time since she'd arrived, Clara didn't look like someone waiting to vanish. The storm raged outside, but inside that cabin something softer began to grow. A quiet shelter built not from walls, but from understanding. The days passed quietly, almost too quietly. The cabin that had once known only loneliness now carried soft sounds. The rustle of baby blankets, the crackle of a growing fire, the faint hum of a woman's lullaby. Elias didn't say it out loud, but something inside him had begun to thaw. There was a gentleness in the way Clara moved around the room, the way she touched everything as though afraid to disturb the peace she'd found. But peace never lasts long in places like this. Not when the past still knows your name. It was just after sunrise when Elias saw the first trail of footprints near the ridge, too heavy for deer, too deliberate for drifters. He crouched low, running a hand over the tracks. 3 men, maybe 4. He followed the prints with his eyes, then turned toward the cabin where Clara was feeding the baby by the fire. Something told him not to speak yet. No need to stir fear until he was sure. But his gut already knew, whoever she was running from, they were close. That night, after the baby slept, Elias sat by the fire, sharpening his old rifle. Clara watched him quietly, her hands still over Noah's small chest. The light flickered against her face, soft and tired. She looked different now, less like a stranger, and more like someone he'd always known but never met. "You've been watching the ridge," she said softly. Elias didn't answer. The sound of steel brushing stone filled the silence. Finally, he said, "There are tracks. Men passing through." "You should tell me the truth now, Clara." She hesitated, eyes glistening in the dim light. Then, like something she'd carried too long, the words began to spill. "I was married once," she began. "He wasn't a kind man. Wealthy, powerful, cruel. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought maybe he'd change. But instead, he wanted the baby gone." Her voice cracked. "Said a child would ruin his reputation. I ran. Took what I could and never looked back." Elias leaned forward, eyes dark with quiet anger. "So those men—" "His men," she whispered. "They've been hunting me for months. I've hidden in barns, churches, under bridges, until I couldn't run anymore. I was going to give up that night before you found me." The room went still. Elias stared into the fire, watching the flames twist and dance. He'd lost his wife once, to sickness, not cruelty. And in Clara's story, he saw every ghost he'd tried to bury. "You're safe here," he said again, firmer this time. I promise you that. She looked at him, not with fear, but with something that felt like belief. A trembling trust, slowly finding its way back to life. It happened 2 nights later. The baby had just fallen asleep when the sound of horses shattered the silence. Slow at first, then faster. 4 riders moving straight down the trail. Elias's blood ran cold. He grabbed his rifle from the mantel. Clara froze where she stood, her face pale as ash. "It's them," she whispered. Elias moved to the window. The flicker of lanterns cut through the darkness, and voices carried through the wind, rough, commanding, confident. Men who believed the night belonged to them. He turned back to her. "Take Noah. Go to the root cellar. Don't come out until I say." Her eyes widened. "Elias, go," he said, his voice sharp but steady. "Now." Clara hesitated for only a second before she vanished into the shadows, clutching the baby close. Elias stepped onto the porch, the wooden boards creaking under his boots. The riders stopped just beyond the fence. One of them, tall and broad, leaned forward on his saddle. "We're looking for—" "A woman. Came through here a few nights back. Carrying a child that ain't hers." Elias didn't flinch. "No one's come through here." The man chuckled. "You sure about that, old-timer? See, we tracked her prints straight to your fence line. You wouldn't lie to me, would you?" Elias met his gaze, calm, unwavering. "You step 1 foot past that fence, you'll find out." A tense silence filled the air. Then one of the riders dismounted, boots sinking into the wet ground. Elias raised his rifle, slow and steady. The man froze. The others shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another. Finally, the leader spat on the ground. "She's not worth dying over, old man." Elias's voice was low but firm. "Then ride on before you find out who is." The men lingered a moment longer, muttering curses, then turned their horses and disappeared into the night. When the sound of hooves finally faded, Elias lowered his gun and let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He walked back inside, closed the door, and waited. Moments later, Clara emerged from the cellar, shaking, clutching Noah tight. "They're gone," Elias said quietly. "But they'll be back." Tears welled in her eyes. "Why are you doing this for me?" He looked at her, really looked. "Because someone should have done it for my wife once, and because that child deserves to grow up knowing the world isn't all cruelty." Something broke inside her then. The walls she'd built, the fear she'd carried. She stepped forward, tears streaming freely, and whispered, "Thank you." Days turned into weeks. The tracks never returned. Winter began to soften, and with it, the air around the cabin. Clara smiled more often now, quietly, gently, like someone learning how to live again. Elias would sometimes find her standing on the porch, Noah in her arms, watching the horizon with a look that wasn't fear anymore, but peace. One morning, as the sun spilled gold across the snow, Clara turned to Elias and said, "I don't know what happens next, but I don't want to keep running." He looked at her, his eyes soft. "Then don't. You've got a home here if you want it." Her lips trembled. "Are you sure?" Elias smiled faintly. "I was alone for too long. Maybe the good Lord figured it was time to fix that." She laughed softly, the first real laugh he'd heard from her, and in that moment the cabin didn't feel lonely anymore. No papers were signed, no vows were spoken, but something deeper bound them together, not by blood or promise, but by survival, by trust, and by the quiet decision to stop running from life. As the sun sank beyond the hills, Elias stood at the fence, the same fence where he'd found her months ago. He turned back toward the cabin where Clara rocked Noah to sleep in the glow of the fire. He smiled. "Guess you were meant to find that blanket after all." A full year had passed since that bitter winter night when Elias found Clara and her baby beside his fence. The seasons had rolled by in quiet harmony, spring thawing the last of the frost, summer painting the valley in wildflowers, and now autumn wrapping the land in soft gold. The cabin that once echoed with emptiness now hummed with life. A gentle laughter drifted through the open door, followed by the soft patter of Noah's tiny feet against the wooden floor. He was walking now, wobbly, determined, full of mischief that made both Elias and Clara smile more than they ever thought they could again. Elias sat on the porch, whittling a piece of pine wood, his eyes squinting against the low sun. He'd carved a small horse, rough around the edges but strong, just like life had made him. Clara stepped out with a steaming mug of coffee, her face lit by the glow of the setting sun. "You still working on that toy?" she teased softly. He smiled without looking up. "Takes time to make something that'll last." She chuckled, setting the mug beside him. "You're talking about the carving or the life we built?" Elias paused, then looked up at her. Really looked. Both, maybe. There was warmth in her eyes now, the kind that only comes when fear finally lets go. The woman who once trembled beside his fence now stood tall and sure, her voice steady, her spirit unbroken. She wasn't running anymore. That night, after Noah had fallen asleep, Clara sat by the fire, sewing the edges of an old quilt. Elias was nearby, oiling his rifle out of habit, though he rarely needed it anymore. The world beyond their fence still carried its dangers, but in their small corner of it, peace had taken root. She looked up suddenly, her voice quiet but full of meaning. "Do you ever think about that night? About why you stopped when you heard me crying?" Elias smiled faintly.
Every day.
"Sometimes I think it wasn't me who found you. Maybe it was the other way around." Her eyes softened. "You really believe that?" He nodded. "After my wife passed, I thought the world had nothing left for me. But when I saw you there holding that baby, something in me woke up again. Maybe that was God's way of reminding me that love don't always come how we expect it." Tears welled quietly in Clara's eyes. She set the quilt aside and reached for his hand. Rough, scarred, steady. "You saved us, Elias." He shook his head. "No, you gave me a reason to start living again." The firelight flickered between them, warm and golden, dancing across their faces like a blessing. Outside, the wind whispered softly through the trees, carrying the faint sound of the stream that never stopped flowing, a sound that promised life goes on, no matter how cold the winters once were. As the night deepened, Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, whispering almost to herself, "I think we finally found home." Elias looked down at her and smiled. "Yeah, I reckon we did." The camera, or narration tone, slowly fades out, showing the cabin surrounded by tall pines, smoke curling gently from the chimney, the faint sound of a baby's laughter carried by the wind. 15 years had passed since that night when the crying woman and her baby appeared beside Elias's old fence. The land had changed with time. The hills greener, the fences rebuilt, the cabin now larger and brighter. But some things never changed. The sound of the river, the steady rhythm of the wind through the trees, and the warmth of a home built not by blood, but by love. Noah was no longer a baby in swaddling cloth. He was tall now, strong, kind-eyed, with the same quiet determination Elias once had. He'd grown up knowing the smell of pine, the weight of an axe, the hum of summer crickets, and the safety of two people who had given him everything. But there was one thing he never knew. One evening, while cleaning the attic, Noah found an old wooden chest tucked beneath the rafters. It was covered in dust, locked with rusted hinges. When he pried it open, the smell of cedar and thyme filled the air. Inside, beneath a few faded letters and a broken watch, was an old, worn blanket, the one he'd been wrapped in the night his mother was found. He picked it up carefully, the fabric thin and frayed, yet somehow still warm. Along the corner was something stitched in faded thread. E.M. Noah frowned. Those weren't his mother's initials. He carried the blanket downstairs where Clara was stirring a pot of stew by the fire. Elias sat by the window, his hair more silver now, his eyes still sharp. "Ma?" Noah asked quietly, holding the blanket out. "Where did this come from?" Clara froze. Her hand trembled slightly as she turned. Her eyes filled with memories she hadn't spoken of in years. Elias looked up slowly, already knowing what the boy had found. "That's the blanket you were wrapped in," Clara said softly. I know, Noah replied. But these initials, EM, that's not yours. A long silence hung between them. Finally, Elias set his cup down and said, It's mine. Noah blinked, confused. Yours? Elias nodded. It belonged to my wife. Her name was Evelyn Mercer. She made that blanket long before she passed. I kept it in the barn, couldn't bring myself to throw it away. His voice softened. The night I found you and your mother by the fence, you were wrapped in it. I thought. Maybe that was her way of telling me not to give up on life. Noah looked between them, the old man who had raised him and the woman who had risked everything to protect him. He felt something stir inside, something heavy and full. So, if you hadn't kept this blanket? Elias smiled faintly, his weathered face softening. Then maybe I'd have never stopped that night. And maybe you and your ma would have never made it through the cold. Clara stepped closer, tears shining in her eyes. You were meant to find him, Elias. Maybe that's why she left that blanket behind. Elias reached for Noah's shoulder, his grip firm but gentle. You may not carry my blood, son, but you carry my name, my home, and my heart. And that's all that ever mattered. Noah swallowed hard, his voice breaking. Then I'll make you proud, Pa, I promise. Elias smiled, his eyes glistening. You already did, boy. The fire crackled softly as they stood there, the three of them, bound not by blood, but by fate, by a single act of kindness that changed all their lives. That night, as the stars stretched wide across the dark sky, Noah walked out to the fence, the same fence where his story began. He carried the old blanket with him and draped it gently over the wooden post. He whispered, Thank you, to the night air, to the woman who made it, to the man who stopped to help, to the mother who never gave up. And when the wind rose softly through the pines, it felt almost like the land itself whispered back. The years rolled quietly across the valley. Seasons turned, the trees thickened, and the cabin that once echoed with the laughter of a little boy now stood as a home built by a man. Noah Mercer, the boy once wrapped in an old blanket, was now a man of his own making. His hands were calloused from years of labor, his shoulders broad, and his heart full of the same kindness Elias had shown him. The old man had passed peacefully 2 winters ago, his last words simple. Keep helping those who need it, boy. That's how you keep my spirit alive, Noah had promised, and he intended to keep it. One cold autumn night, as a storm rolled over the hills, Noah was closing the barn when he heard something faint. A cry carried through the rain. He grabbed his lantern and stepped into the darkness. The wind was fierce, rain slicing through the night like glass. Then, through the storm, he saw it. A small wagon stuck in the mud near the fence line. A horse lay still beside it, exhausted. Inside the wagon, a young woman clutched a bundled infant to her chest, her face pale from the cold. Noah's heart stopped. The scene, it was exactly how Elias had found him and his mother all those years ago. He rushed forward, shouting above the wind. Hey! You're gonna be all right. I've got you! The woman blinked up at him, her lips trembling. Please, my baby, he hasn't cried in a while. Noah climbed onto the wagon, lifted the child carefully, and pressed a hand against the tiny chest. The heartbeat was faint, but still there. He's alive, Noah whispered. Come on, we're going inside. He carried them both back through the storm, the same path Elias once took. Inside the cabin, the fire roared to life as Noah wrapped them in blankets, his hands shaking, not from the cold, but from the weight of memory. When the woman finally stirred by the firelight, she whispered, You saved us. Noah shook his head softly. No, ma'am. Someone saved me once. I'm just returning the favor. She looked around the cabin, the photos on the wall, the scent of pine and smoke. This place feels safe. It's meant to, Noah said with a faint smile. It's been a home for lost souls before. She smiled weakly, tears glistening. My name's Lila. We've been traveling for days. No food left. Horse gave out. I didn't think anyone would find us. Noah looked toward the fire, where the infant now slept peacefully. Funny thing, he murmured. When my father found me, he said the same thing, that he didn't think anyone would be out there that night. Guess some things are meant to happen. For a long moment, silence filled the room, the gentle kind that feels like healing. The storm outside faded to a drizzle, and Noah stood, draping an old, worn blanket over Lila's shoulders. She ran her fingers along the fabric. This feels old, hand-stitched. It is, Noah said softly. It belonged to the woman who made this place a home long before I was born. Guess it's got a way of finding folks who need it most. Lila looked at him, eyes shining. You're a good man, Noah. He smiled, a humble, weary smile that looked a lot like Elias's once did. Just trying to live up to my promise. That night Noah sat by the window watching the storm fade into moonlight. In the reflection of the glass, he thought he saw the faint outline of a man, silver-haired, proud, smiling from somewhere beyond the years. Noah whispered, I kept your word, Pa. The wind outside shifted softly, like a voice carried across the fields. Gentle, approving, eternal. The morning after the storm, the air was still, the kind of stillness that only follows a night of thunder. Mist curled over the valley like a soft blanket, and the wet earth glistened beneath the pale dawn. Noah stepped out onto the porch, his breath fogging in the chill. Inside, Lila and her baby slept peacefully beside the fire. The sight brought him a strange comfort, a quiet echo of the life his father had once given him. But something about the storm felt different, almost like it had stirred the land itself. He walked down toward the old fence line, the same weathered posts that had witnessed his mother's tears and Elias's act of kindness decades ago. Most of the rails were new now, rebuilt over the years, but a few of the original boards remained. As Noah reached the far corner, he noticed something unusual, a patch of earth freshly turned by the rain. A bit of wood peeked through the soil. He knelt down, brushing the mud away until his fingers struck something solid, an old wooden box, half rotted but still intact. He pried it open carefully. Inside were a few faded keepsakes, a silver locket, a bundle of letters, and a folded note sealed in wax. The initials pressed into the seal made his heart stop. E.M. Evelyn Mercer, his father's late wife. Noah sat there for a long moment, the valley silent around him. Then he opened the letter. If anyone finds this, I want them to know I forgave him. Elias loved me once with all he had, and though fate took me early, I know he'll find someone who needs him more than I ever did. I hope he doesn't grieve too long. I hope he remembers that love never dies. It just changes hands. Tears blurred Noah's vision as he read the words. It was almost as if the woman who made that blanket had known, somehow, that her love would travel forward through time, finding the people who needed it most. He looked up toward the cabin, where Lila now stood in the doorway, holding her baby close. She smiled softly, unaware of what he'd found. And in that moment, Noah understood something deeper, that his life had been part of a promise made long before he was even born. He closed the box and whispered, Thank you, Evelyn. You gave my father peace, and through him, you gave me a life. He reburied the box gently beneath the fence, laying the blanket over it for a moment before standing. The wind stirred, slow and warm, as if the land itself sighed in contentment. When Noah turned back toward the cabin, he saw Lila watching him, her hair catching the sunlight. You okay? She called softly. He smiled. Yeah, he said, voice thick with emotion. Just visiting an old friend. As they sat together later, Lila asked, Will you stay out here forever? Alone? Noah glanced toward the hills. Was thinking I might not have to anymore. Her eyes met his, quiet understanding passing between them. The same place that once symbolized sorrow had now become a circle of renewal, where pain turned into peace, and strangers turned into family. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Noah stood once again beside that old fence. He placed a hand on the post where he had once been found as a child and whispered, Your promise lives on, Pa. I'll keep it. As long as I breathe. The stars flickered above him, brighter than ever, as if the heavens themselves were smiling on the land that had carried so many secrets and healed so many hearts. A few weeks had passed since the storm that brought Lila and her baby into Noah's life. The cabin had changed since then. Laughter drifted through its halls again, the fire burned warmer, and for the first time in years, the place felt alive. Lila helped with the garden, humming softly as she worked, while Noah chopped wood by the barn. The baby, little Eli, named after his late father, had started to giggle every time Noah whistled. It filled the place with something Noah hadn't heard in a long time: joy. But there was something Lila hadn't told him, something heavy that lingered behind her smile. One afternoon, Noah found her standing by the river that ran past the old fence line. The sun caught her hair, and she was staring down at the water with tears in her eyes. He walked up quietly. "Didn't mean to sneak up on you," he said softly. She turned, startled, brushing her face quickly. "No, it's all right, just thinking." "About what?" Lila hesitated. "About where I came from." Noah tilted his head. "You mean before the storm?" She nodded slowly. "Before everything." He waited, patient as ever. Finally, she said, "My mother used to tell me stories about a man she once met. Kind, quiet, lived by a river and a fence. She said he saved her once, when she was young and lost." Noah frowned. "Your mother?" Lila's voice trembled. "Her name was Clara." Noah froze. The world seemed to still. "Clara," he whispered. "My mother's name was Clara Mercer." She stared at him, confusion and shock flooding her face. "Mercer? That's my mother's maiden name." The silence that followed was thunderous. The wind rustled through the trees as if carrying the past between them. Noah's voice broke. "Are you saying—" Lila nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I think we're family, Noah. My mother, she had another child before she met my father. She told me once that she left him behind to save his life. She said he was found by a man beside a fence, wrapped in an old blanket." Noah's legs gave out beneath him. He sat down hard in the grass, his chest tight, his mind spinning. The words hit him like lightning through the heart. He looked up at her, eyes wet. "Then that means—" Lila's lips trembled. "You're my brother." The river beside them whispered softly, as if it had known all along. Noah bowed his head, tears falling freely now, not from sorrow, but from something deeper, something whole. He stood stepping forward and wrapped her in his arms. "All these years," he whispered, voice shaking, "I thought I was alone." Lila sobbed against him. "You were never alone. Mama never stopped loving you. She used to talk about a boy with bright eyes and a strong heart. Said she prayed every night that he was safe." Noah closed his eyes, the pain and love of decades flowing through him. "She saved me, Lila, and Pa raised me. Guess they both gave me half a home." The two stood there for a long while, the river glinting in the sunlight, the same river that had witnessed everything: loss, hope, and now reunion. When they finally walked back toward the cabin, Lila glanced at Noah and smiled through her tears. "Guess fate doesn't make mistakes, huh?" Noah smiled softly. "No, ma'am. It just takes the long way round." That night he placed Evelyn's old blanket across the rocking chair beside the fire, the same one that had once carried him to safety. Now it rested quietly, like a guardian finally at peace. The dawn came soft and golden that morning. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the earth damp and shining beneath the sun's gentle rise. Mist hung low over the meadows, and every blade of grass seemed to sparkle like glass. Elias stepped out onto the porch, coffee steaming in his hand, the old blanket folded neatly under his arm. His joints ached a little more these days, but the ache didn't bother him much. It was the kind that reminded him he was still alive, still needed. He watched Noah in the distance, working by the corral with quiet focus. Each movement was sure, steady, just like his own once were. Clara was inside, humming as she always did in the mornings, her voice mixing with the soft creak of the rocking chair and the chirp of sparrows along the fence. The world felt settled again, peaceful in a way Elias hadn't known for most of his life. After a while, Noah came walking up to the porch, his hands in his pockets, boots muddy. He leaned against one of the old posts, glancing at the folded blanket in Elias's hands. "You still keep it close," he said softly. Elias smiled. "Some things you never let go of. Not because they hold you down, but because they remind you how far you've come." Noah nodded, quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've been thinking, Pa. Maybe we could name the ranch after that blanket, after what it stood for." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You mean—" "Fated Meetings." The old man's eyes softened. He looked out at the horizon where the sun was spilling gold over the valley. "Fated Meetings Ranch," he murmured. "Has a good ring to it." Clara came out just then, wiping her hands on her apron. "I like it," she said warmly, "because that's what this place became. A home built from chance, from grace, from the kind of miracles you don't see coming." Elias looked between them, his son and the woman who had become his heart's peace, and for a moment, the years seemed to melt away. He handed the blanket to Noah. "Then you keep it, son. Pass it on someday. Let folks remember what it means when life throws two lost souls together." Noah took the blanket, his throat tight. "I will, Pa." As the sun climbed higher, the three of them stood together at the porch, father, mother, and son, watching the light wash over the valley. For the first time in a long, long while, Elias didn't think about what he'd lost. He thought about what he'd been given, a second chance, a family, and the quiet, unexplainable magic of a fated meeting. The camera would linger there, the light, the silence, the faces of people who'd found home not by blood, but by grace. The years had rolled by like a slow river, steady and unstoppable. Elias Maddox had passed quietly one spring morning, sitting on his porch, the same blanket across his knees and a half-carved piece of cedar resting in his hands. Clara followed 2 winters later. Her last words to Noah were simple, the kind that live forever in a man's chest. "Keep the door open, son. You never know who might need a place to rest." Now the ranch belonged to Noah, Fated Meetings Ranch, and though the land was larger, the fences stronger, and the barns newer, Noah still ran it the old way, honest hands, early mornings, and a quiet faith that the world had a rhythm beyond his understanding. It was early autumn when it happened. The sky was bruised with distant thunder, and the wind carried that smell of rain and dust that always came before a storm. Noah was fixing the south gate when he saw movement along the road, a lone figure walking, small against the dark horizon. He straightened, squinting through the wind. It was a woman, young, maybe mid-20s, wearing a travel-worn coat and holding a bundle close to her chest. Her steps were uneven, her hair clinging wet against her face. Noah felt his chest tighten. The scene was too familiar. The storm, the woman, the way she held that bundle like it was life itself. By the time she reached the fence, she was shaking from exhaustion. Her eyes lifted, catching his, wide with fear and hope all tangled together. "Please," she said, voice trembling. "I didn't know where else to go." Noah dropped his tools and crossed the mud to her side, his voice steady. "You're safe here, ma'am. Come on now." He reached to help her, and as she shifted, the bundle in her arms slipped just enough for him to see. A baby, sleeping soundly, wrapped in an old, faded blanket. Noah froze. It couldn't be. The stitching. Those same red initials. E.M. He swallowed hard, rain starting to fall around them. "Where did you get that blanket?" he asked quietly. The woman looked down at it, her lip trembling. "It was my mother's," she whispered. "She said it belonged to the man who saved her life. A long time ago." The wind howled through the trees then, and Noah felt something shift deep inside him, like time folding over itself. He took a slow breath and nodded toward the cabin. "Let's get you and the little one inside before the storm hits," he said gently. As they walked toward the porch, the rain began to pour, heavy and familiar, and somewhere in the thunder's echo, Noah could almost hear his father's voice again. "Some things ain't coincidence, boy. Some things are meant." Inside, the fire crackled to life, and history quietly repeated itself. A new meeting, another chance, another story written in the same old valley. The storm raged through the night, fierce and unrelenting. Thunder rolled across the valley, shaking the windows of the old cabin that had seen generations come and go. But inside, warmth glowed from the fire, a steady heartbeat in the middle of the wild. Noah sat across from the young woman, her baby sleeping soundly in the cradle near the hearth. She'd told him her name, Lila, from a town far south near the border. Her voice was soft, steady, but beneath it, Noah could hear the exhaustion of a long, hard journey. He'd given her dry clothes, a warm meal, and a place by the fire, just as his father once had. When she finally slept, Noah found himself studying the blanket again, that same worn cloth, edges frayed, initials faded but still there, E.M. He reached out, tracing the stitches with his thumb. Elias Maddox, his father's initials. But how had it found its way to this woman's child after all these years? When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving behind a clean, golden silence. The air smelled of wet pine and fresh beginnings. Lila stepped outside with her baby in her arms, the sunlight catching the red thread in the blanket. "My mother used to tell me stories about this," she said softly. She said it came from a man who helped her when she had nowhere to go. She said it was her sign that kindness still existed. Noah smiled faintly. "Your mother, what was her name?" "Clara," she said, looking down at the child. "Clara Maddox." Noah felt the world go still around him. He stepped back, breath catching. That was my mother's name." Lila looked up sharply. For a long, trembling moment, the two just stared at each other, the wind brushing between them, gentle, like a whisper of something divine. "Then you're—" she began. "My sister's girl," Noah finished softly, his voice breaking. "My niece." The realization hit them both like sunlight breaking through clouds. The storm that had once separated lives had now brought them together again. Tears welled in Lila's eyes. She looked down at her baby, smiling through the emotion. "Then he's family too," she whispered. Noah stepped forward, his voice gentle. "Then he's home." He took off his hat, looking toward the distant hills where his father and mother rested. "Guess you were right, Pa," he murmured. Some things are meant. The camera would linger there. The cabin, the fence, the morning light spilling over the land that had seen love, loss, and reunion. The same blanket that once symbolized sorrow now wrapped a new life, proof that grace never truly fades. As the wind swept through the valley carrying the scent of pine and rain, the sign near the gate creaked softly in the breeze.